Hey everyone, my guest for this episode has had an interesting corporate career that got halted when she was faced with a medical and health scare. Let me tell you, we talk about everything from managing your thoughts when you have a health scare, helping your partner get on board with a major life change when you decide that you want to move, yes, physically move, figuring out your career path, managing yourself in your career advancement, and we have a great discussion about putting yourself out there when it comes to applying for jobs or networking for that next opportunity. There are so many nuggets of thought and wisdom in this episode, and I would be amiss to not provide commentary on a part of our conversation where Lisa shares her experience as a woman in a male-dominated industry and organization. One thing that Lisa said that I want to make sure people hear is that we are all humans. And at the end of the day, if we treat each other with dignity and respect, it doesn't matter if you're in a male-dominated or female-dominated organization or industry. While Lisa does acknowledge that there is work to be done, and you can continue listening for her details on what that looks like, I hope the managers out there hear her message. We are human. Take time to consider your own bias, your own worldview, and your own experiences and how you might be projecting those onto others. Self-awareness is the key to not only controlling your career, but getting to the next level. As leaders, we have a responsibility to our employees and teams to lead from a place of compassion, understanding, and empathy, especially right now during a pandemic. If you're looking for the links to the resources mentioned in this episode, you can head over to ridethetidecollective.com/podcast to find the episode blog, and I will link it in the show notes. As always, if you want to connect with me or need inspirational and educational career management and advancement content, you can follow Ride the Tide Collective on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. I am also on Clubhouse now at Ride the Tide COL. If you're loving these interview episodes, please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. And if you didn't know, I also have the video version of this interview up on my YouTube channel, which you can also subscribe to. As always, I appreciate your support. Welcome, everyone. My guest this week is a little bit of a deviation from the other guests that I've had, but I am so happy to have her. Her name is Lisa Michaud, and her history and her story is so powerful and so impactful that I had to bring her on. And here's the interesting thing. So I don't normally bring on other coaches, not because I don't like other coaches, but because I want to share the stories of people who are in that 9-to-5 grind, who are in traditional positions. But here's what's so interesting about Lisa's story. First of all, her background, she came out of male-dominated fields in insurance and education and, oh my gosh, what else was it? She was at Safeway. She was at an energy company. I mean, she was in some of the most male-dominated fields. So we're definitely going to dig into that a little bit and what that was like for her. But then she also had this medical scare, and I'm going to let her talk about that. But it absolutely changed her view of her career and her life and where she was headed. So I am so excited. Lisa, thank you so much for being a guest and coming on and sharing your experience and your story with my audience.
Julia, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to connect with you and everyone here listening today. Thanks for welcoming another coach on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so I want to dive right in, and I want to start with I want to start more from the end of your story, kind of work our way back. Tell me about the health scare, because this was a huge moment that really shifted where your life was headed. So can you share with our audience, as whatever you feel comfortable with, what happened and how that changed your perspective?
Yeah, totally. So about 6 or 7 years ago, I was living in Northern Canada in a small town and working in the energy industry. My husband and I had recently gotten married. We were both had 6-figure careers. We were moving up the ladder. We bought a house, we had a rental property, we were traveling around the world. We like everything was good. And we ticked all those traditional boxes, go to school, get married, buy a house, buy another house, all those things. And then I had my health scare and I faced the reality that I might only have a year or two left to live. And in that moment, I remember that night laying in bed with my husband and looking at him. And I said, honey, like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do if I only have a year or two left to live? And he's the pragmatic one, okay? He is the logical. He looks at me and he says, Lisa, you're the one with the timeline. What do you want to do? And the first thing that came to my mind in that moment was move to Vancouver. And I have to tell you, Julia, growing up, I lived on Vancouver Island. So I'd come to Vancouver a lot as a little kid. And my parents would fall asleep in the hotel room, and I would sneak out to the window. I'd pull open the curtains, and I would put in my Christina Aguilera CD and look at the city lights and just dream about living there. And that was kind of my whole childhood, was like this vision of living in the city. But
Okay,
then,
hold on. Okay, most of my audience is from the US. So I want I want to make an equivalent for that. This is the equivalent of you grew up in like small town America somewhere and you went to LA or New York to vacation or something like that, and you had this like starry-eyed, I want to go
exactly,
move and live in the city. So I
you
just
got
want to
it.
make that
Yes.
connection for our audience who lives in the US.
Totally. I was the kid that was so excited just to be on public transit. Like that's how starry-eyed I was. I was like, public transit, this is like, look at this. I'm on the train, guys. Like that's how starry-eyed I was. Totally. And it was really funny because I think so often we all have childhood dreams. We all have things that we want. And maybe like your dreams, mine kind of got pushed to the side as I got older and I got more practical. Let's say practical with quotes around them. So first it was that I was 11. I couldn't move out on my own. So that's why I didn't move. And then it was because my university wasn't in the city. And then my boyfriend wasn't there. And then my other boyfriend wasn't there. And then my job wasn't in the city. And then soon enough, I had a mortgage tied down and my career was growing. And my husband's a small town boy. We had a quad or an ATV. I'm not sure what you guys call it in the different
Same
parts of.
same thing there. Yeah.
Okay. So we had that. I was like, what the heck? Like, okay, we're definitely not moving to the city now. But in that moment of laying in bed, facing this reality that I might only have a year or two left to live, I really had to ask myself, am I going to continue to build this list of excuses? Because you better believe I can make it longer. Or am I going to find a way to make this happen and make this possible? Am I going to listen to why I can't and die with regrets? Or am I going to find a way to make it happen? And I chose to make it happen. And what my husband and I both did in that moment was to start asking, how is it possible? And I'll tell you, it's possible, as we learned over the next couple months. And I should also say this: I'm very grateful. As I speak here today, I'm healthy. It was a scare,
Yeah.
but it was really the scare I needed that to wake me up. And so from there, we started to ask, how is it possible? And so it took us a few months, but we sold one house and then we sold the other house. We sold a whole lot of stuff. We had to sell cars, and yes, I get to ride public transit. That's very exciting now. We, my husband quit his job. We were able to make this move. And in case you're wondering what happened to the ATV or the quad, I now share a parking stall with it in my building in downtown Vancouver. But it's incredible what happens when you can shift your mindset. I know
Right.
all this time I was like, we won't be able to move because of a quad. I'm like,
And I just got the visual in my head, and that just makes it even.
yeah. I mean, I think our neighbors are like, oh yeah, they're the small town people.
That's
But it's
awesome.
pretty great. So like that was definitely a really pivotal thing for me. And it took several months. That wasn't an easy thing to do. And definitely my parents, when we just gotten married, and so for us to call our parents and say we have news, they're like, oh my gosh, grandchildren. We're like, no, we're selling everything. We're quitting our jobs. We're moving to the city. They're like, what? But we did it. And that was kind of the first big shift that I had in terms of realizing that there was a lot of things I wanted to do in my life that I was putting on the back burner, saying I would do one day, maybe someday when I was ready, quote, ready. And even possibly like in this instance of Vancouver, I just thought it would never happen.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of my first realization of, okay, like I'm here. There are things that I want to do with my life. I'm going to go get them. I'm going to go chase them, because even though the doctors haven't told me I have a year or two left to live, I actually don't know what that's going to look like. So I'm going to make the most of the time that I have. So that's the health scare. There you go.
Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine what that must have felt like, especially being so young. I mean, I think you were in your 20s when that happened, right? Like in
Yeah.
your late 20s. I can't even imagine. But here's what's interesting, especially right now as we're recording this, early 2021. So we're in the middle of this global pandemic. And I think we're seeing people being faced with death in a completely different way than they were before, because they're seeing people in their circle getting COVID, or, something's happening. And I think just this idea of, oh, what am I really doing with my life? All these truths are starting to bubble up for a lot of people. And I think so many people are feeling the way that you felt many years ago, before that was really, I mean, I feel like now it's kind of like the thing, quote unquote, but you've gone through it. And now I think there are so many people that are in that same position, which again is part of why I brought you on. And thank you so much for being so transparent and sharing that with us, because that's huge to make such a big shift like that in your life. And I think there are people listening that might be contemplating whether or not that's a good idea. And I'd love to know, my husband and I, we do a lot of visioning together, separately. And I know for us, we had a similar situation happen. I'm not going to go into the details, but my parents passed away. And that's what led us to make a huge shift. We did the opposite though. We moved into a less populated area. um, but that
No public
visioning,
transit.
no public transit. Well, actually, no, we do have public transit. We do. We don't have to use it, but we do have it. But it was such a shift for us in thinking, like you said. And I'd love to know, what was some of that process? Like, did you and your husband sit down and build out this vision, or was it more, we're just making that decision? Like, how did that work itself out for you guys?
That's a great question. It definitely took time. I think in that the moment was that realization. And I think that if you've ever lost a job, lost someone close to you, or had these kind of scares, you have this realization. But often, even just having that, yes, it can change you. Yes, it can make you see things. But then you also have to have the courage to follow through and to actually, like, a part of you has to change to achieve any goal or anything different in your life, career, anything. You have to change what you're doing. So we did, that in that moment I knew right away what I wanted to do. It doesn't mean that I was able to do it right away. It definitely took time. So for my husband and I, we also, I think maybe other people can relate to this too. Like, I definitely had some self-doubt, or like, is this really the right decision? Or you're like, this is crazy. What are we doing? We both have awesome, high paying, great jobs. Things were good. It wasn't like anything was bad. So there was a lot of, questioning and re-going back to what we wanted. And even thinking about where we wanted to move to. I definitely wanted Vancouver, but for my husband, he was like, okay, like, I'm ready to move, but I don't know if that's the place. And so even that was like, okay, well, where do we want to move? So in that process, we definitely did some visioning in terms of, what do we see the next 5 to 10 years of our life looking like? What do we see ourselves wanting to do? And let me tell you, we actually did a really cool thing. My friend suggested this to me. We pretended for a week that we were going to live in each of the different places. So for a week, we pretended like we were going to live in Calgary, which is another bigger, smaller city in Canada. And so for that time, because here's what can happen. Like, let's say you want to change careers. Maybe you start looking at everything, and all of a sudden you're overwhelmed and you're like, I can't make any decision. And so I don't make any decision. So same thing could happen for us. When we were looking at 3 different cities, it was like, okay, well, now we're looking at real estate in 3 cities, and jobs in 3 cities, and running tracks in 3 cities, and dance classes and all the things, and restaurants. And so we just broke it down. We said, okay, this week, let's just pretend like we're moving to this city. And so I'm only going to look at real estate in that city. I'm going to look for jobs in that city. I'm going to see, what neighborhoods do I like? What kinds of activities would I be doing? Would I be skiing in that city? Canada, come on. Or am I going to be running in that city? Vancouver, here we go. Like that kind of an idea of what is the community like? What kind of organizations would I volunteer for? Getting a sense for it. And then we did the same thing with Vancouver. And the Vancouver week happened to coincide with the time when we were actually coming to the city. I was running a half marathon here. So it was so perfect. And we just felt like as soon as we landed here, as soon as we even started thinking about it, everything just felt really good. Everything flowed. Like, we just became different people. And so that's I know that's a weird counter, like most people are like, oh, just make a pros cons list. But that's not that, it's not that simple. And so that doing that actually allowed us to access, I think, our intuitions and a different level of knowing. I know that sounds kind of woo, but that was really helpful for us to actually feeling like, what's it going to feel like to do this? And I've since shared that with some of the people that I've worked with, even, somebody listening to this, your career, maybe you're debating, do I take this new job or not? Or, do I go remote or do I stay doing what I'm doing? And like envision for a couple of days and really feel what that would feel like, and like go on, do the commute and see what you think. Imagine, the different work environment you might be in. Imagine the type of work you can be doing. There's so much power, I think, to putting yourself and imagining what could be or what it will be. And you'll feel, is this a yay or is this a nay?
Oh, I love that. That is such a great tip for people and so practical. And one of the themes that I've seen through some of the interviews that I've been doing is a lot of my guests have made big moves at some point in their career, physical moves from where they were comfortable to a new place, sometimes back again, sometimes to a different place. And what you're talking about, what a great practical application way to make some of those decisions. And you can couple that even with a values process of what is most important to you in your life. Are you a runner? Do you need to be near the ocean? Do you want to be near the mountains? Do you want to be near an airport? That was something important to us. We wanted to be really close to an airport so that our friends and family could get to us very easily. So once you start to figure those pieces out, I love this idea of pretend you're living there for a week and focus your research for a week, because you're right. I see so many people in the job search process get overwhelmed, especially right out of college. I feel like that's when there are so many opportunities and you're more willing to make a move somewhere and you don't know what the best move is to make. And my favorite is when we have somebody who, I grew up in Southern California, spent most of my life there. So somebody who's from Southern California decides, oh, I want to go live in Louisiana or something like that. And those are two completely different places to live, completely different. And if you've never been there, A, go visit, but B, do that extensive research to figure out, is this even an area that I would be comfortable in? And like you're saying, you land and you feel it. And we had the same thing with Utah. Utah was not on our radar at all, not a little bit. I mean, we completely passed it over on the map because it was just not something we had ever thought about. And when we had friends move here and we did more research and we came to visit, it was exactly that. We had this feeling and it was the right feeling for us to make that decision. So thank you so much for sharing that tip. I think that is such a great way to look at decision making if you want to make a big move like that.
Yeah, it's a little unconventional, but pretending that as if you've already made the decision, see what happens. And if you may not have, for us, we had a bit of time. So we had a week to kind of go through all the options. We didn't even need to get to the next ones because we knew. But if you got a job, even for 24 hours, you'll be amazed. Even for 24 hours, if you commit, you say, this is my decision. Let's see how I feel. Let's see what happens when you'll get a sense for it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I have a question that I know I'm probably going to get from viewers. So I'm already going to ask it. How did you get your husband on board with everything? Like, was it the health scare that did that? Or is he somebody, because you said he's a little bit more pragmatic, like, is he somebody that it's harder for him to make a move like that? Was there, like, what was it? Because I know my husband's like that. It was harder for him to come to terms with making a big move. So there was a lot of convincing in time. And I'm just curious, what was it for you?
Yeah, man, I wish I could say that I was super strategic and knew exactly what I was doing, but I didn't. And what's really funny and is that when I had my health scare and I said this thing, and I was like, I want to move to Vancouver. And it was kind of like, okay, like it's 10 o'clock at night. We got to be up at 4 a.m. Like, cool. Good night. Love you kind of thing. I think as we started to kind of chat about it more, it also fell in line with a few of the things that he was thinking. And So let me give you the hard answer and let me give you his head answer. So his heart, he was so one of the, like, I'll never forget this moment in my life either. I remember we talked about it again about, like, are you serious about wanting to do this move? And he looked at me and he said, Lisa, we've lived my dream for 5 years and up here in Fort McMurray. Let's go live your dream. And that was just I know, right? That was such a special moment. And like, this is not my husband all the time. He's still very like, don't be like, oh my, that's not my husband. Like this is a moment that I'll never forget because it was so sweet. But I think it was like a sign perhaps of us. It's a long-term relationship thing, right? It's not just like I say the right thing one time or do the right thing or give him the right argument one time. And that's what convinces him. It's the culmination of a lot of things that you do as partners together that allows you to get to that place. I would also say from like the head perspective, he also saw a couple things that made sense for him. So for him, he had already been in that community for about 10 years. He was also starting to see the real estate market. He had a sense that it might be declining. And this is something like nobody has a crystal ball. We didn't really know what was going to happen, but we thought it might decline. And we had a pretty expensive house at the time. Our house was almost $1 million.
Mhm.
And then we had another one too. So it was quite a bit of money that we had all sitting in this basket. And so we'd also been thinking we had this big house. We didn't need all this space. Like, it might also be a good time even just to downsize. Made us sound
Right.
like we're, you know, empty nesters, but we were 27. But we just had all the space. I was like, okay. So there was kind of a few other things going on too. He noticed as well. It's a very transient community, so I thought that was really fun because I love to meet new people. So it was really exciting. But he's an introvert. And so it was really difficult for him to make friends. Or he'd make great friends and then they'd leave. And he'd make great friends and then they'd leave. And that was getting really difficult as well. So it was kind of a few other things. I wouldn't say that it was that I'm not sure that if I hadn't had my health scare, I don't think we'd be where we are now. But I think it was the catalyst to kind of allow some of these other things that also weren't working for him to factor in. And also the
Mhm.
climate in like northern Canada is very different than Vancouver. People often say Vancouver and Vancouver Island are like the Hawaii of Canada. It's not Hawaii. Don't move here if you're expecting Hawaii. Go to Hawaii if you want Hawaii. But it's much warmer than the rest of Canada. And so that was another thing. Like it was kind of just like things played into some of the things that were uncomfortable for him. So I realize you might be listening to that being like, well, shucks, like my husband didn't say that, or like those aren't things that are going on. But the deeper part of that is, how are you setting up your relationship right now to be a team? Like, what are the conversations that you're having? How are you caring about them, caring about like their career choices or their friendships or whatever the things that their values, whatever they value? How are you supporting them now? And then what kind of vision are you creating for your future together? And I think the key part of that is the together thing, like what does that look like for both of you? I think for probably lots of people with two careers, there's different times where my career maybe takes priority or his career takes priority. It's an ebb and flow. Or, after a health scare like that and me wanting to do something different, like you said, like we'll do your dream because we've done my, quads and small towns dream. So let's go do yours for a while. So, I think that though it's hard to say like that it was a very specific process, but I think being supportive of each other for years leading up to it definitely helped. Having really good conversations, being able to figure out like what's currently not working for you and can we find a place
Mhm.
that's going to work for you better. um and just like being willing to figure it out and let it be messy together.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. That's so great. And I resonate with that so much because that was very similar to what happened with my husband and I. And I want to say something to people who might be like, well, I don't have a health scare. Everything's just so, it is what it is. We're still living the same life. The pandemic impacted us, but maybe not that much if you were already working remote or you have an easily remote job or something like that. What is interesting about this process is if you both sit down and ask yourself these questions. What if we only had a year to live? What if we lost our jobs tomorrow? What if one of us got COVID and it ended up being the bad version because we all are contracting it in different ways? Asking those questions and having some honest conversation about it, I think is a really great first step for people who aren't faced with actual, life changing events, but you want to start the conversation. Because I think similar to you guys, for us, it was about a year and a half or so of us having conversations and discussions and other decisions were made that prompted a different discussion. And then, well, maybe we're going to do this, maybe we're going to do that. But we kept that discussion going. And I know my husband at the time, he was still working full time, commuting to LA. I mean, just crazy, work hours and stuff like that. And he had a very hard time separating, my life now with this possibility of the future, which is also his personality type coming into play there. He can't vision it unless he's almost in it in a way. And I know for us, what helped too was physically coming to the different places that we were thinking about living and talking to people who lived there, going to those spaces. And that really helped him. So if you have somebody who's like that, who maybe can't get out of their day to day, taking them to those spaces and just starting the conversation and planting that seed, I think helps move that conversation along, because then they start to realize how important it is to you to make some type of shift or change in your mentality. And it does take time for sure.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just touch on two more things from what you said that I want to pull out because they're really good. So you said, not everyone's going to have a health scare. And let me tell you something. I was only in like this scary season for maybe a week. It wasn't very long. And you better believe it would have been very easy after that week to be like, funny me, thought I could move to Vancouver, or whew, glad that that's not a scare. I've still got the rest of my life to do this. So it would have been very easy for me to just revert back to what I was already doing. And so I want to say that, but I also want to say in this that you don't need the scare. That all the scare did was help me highlight what I didn't realize I knew. If you already know in your heart, if you're listening to this, you're like, I know what I want. I know what I want to ask them, but I need the scare. You don't need the scare. All you need is the awareness. All you need is the realization. And then the courage to act on it, the courage to speak it. So I don't think you need a scare. I hope you don't ever have to have that scare. And if you know in your heart, wonderful, go have the courage to do it. If you don't know, ask yourself some of these questions that Julia just said. Another good one is, what if you won the lottery? Like, that's another fun one. I like to dream the good way too. Then what would that look like? Right. And it just opens up those conversations. And one other thing that I think that's helpful with partners, teams, managers, anything, is also understanding their personality style and understanding their communication style. So I know there's like the DISC method or Myers-Briggs. There's lots of different ways of understanding people's personalities. That has really helped over the last many years in my relationship and at work as well, understanding how people want to be communicated to. So my husband didn't necessarily want to see my dream condo Vancouver vision board, but him and I could look at, here's 3 or 4 different properties. For example, I was like, okay, here's a matrix of, how much do we value convenience versus turnkey? And how much do we value price and possible appreciation on a property versus being able to just walk right in? So like, that's a way that maybe with my girlfriends, I wouldn't have had that same, it would have been a different conversation. But with my husband, I knew this was the information and how could we organize it in a way that would make sense to him? So it was kind of like also understanding him, his style, and constantly checking into and saying, are you okay with this? Even, he's stability and security is one of his core values. So can you imagine trying to say, no, let go of your 6-figure career and I'll let go of my 6-figure career and we'll sell all the houses and now we won't even be homeowners and we're going to move to the most expensive city in Canada, actually one of the most expensive in the world based on what you make. I had to check in and say, what do you need to feel some stability in this? What do you need to feel safe in this? So it was understanding him, coming back to what he needed. One of the examples was, what he came up with was, okay, when are we going to be ready to move? Like, when do we know that we can actually do this? Like, because are we going to hold on to 2 mortgages, 3 mortgages, 0 mortgage? Like, well, when is it actually, are we quote ready? Are you good? And he said, it'll be when we had to talk about it. He said 2 out of 3 things, I have a job, you have a job, we sell the house. When 2 of those 3 things happen, that's good. Let's make it happen. So that's what we did. We worked on making 2 out of those 3 things happen. And we knew the last one would be able to sustain itself. So I think it's understanding the person's communication and showing up for them in that way.
Lisa, I love talking to you because we're so similar.
Are we married to the same person?
Oh my God. I think we might be, because I'm listening to it. I'm like, yes, that was my husband. Yes, that is exactly what he needed as well. It's just cracking me up. But I know we're not the only ones out there that deal with this. So I so appreciate this dialogue and this conversation, because I think a lot of times, you hear people say, oh, it's so easy, just move, just start your own business, just go do this, just go do that. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. And it's one of the reasons why normally my guests are full-time, they're in a position, they love stability, they love the 9 to 5. They're not necessarily entrepreneurship oriented, because I think there's room for both, right? And I think entrepreneurship is such a big deal right now, of like, go start your own business, be your own boss, do all of these things. Not everybody wants that. And my husband was one of those people. And, right now he's actually a stay-at-home dad, which is really ironic because I didn't think he would do that, but he absolutely loves it. Absolutely loves it. But that was a big shift for him because he never saw a world where he didn't work full time. Even when we moved, he thought, oh, maybe I'll find a different type of job here, or just do something else or whatever. And so I love having these conversations because I think it helps people see, these aren't snap decisions that people are making, even though you might hear it in an interview or in a snippet on social media or in an article that you read. These are not snap decisions. People are going through this dialogue, and it takes time, and it takes months and sometimes years for all the stars to align to actually make these types of decisions. But having those conversations, understanding each other, understanding values and communication, so important. Yes.
Yes. And there's such a big difference between just do it and just start. So just
Yes.
just doing it, I don't think you could just do it. It's hard, but you can start, because I also don't want people listening to this thinking, I, didn't have the scare, or my husband won't do the move, or we're not in whatever situation you're hearing here. We're going to trigger any limiting beliefs that you have, because this is what we do. We all do that for each other. How nice. But I don't want you to hear that. I want you to just hear that, it wasn't necessarily easy. It wasn't that fast, but we started down that process and we started getting going. And every time you just put one foot in front of the other. And that's how 9 months later, you fit a quad into a parking stall. You just make it happen. Not just, it takes time, but you get there. It's piece by piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Okay. Now I want to work backwards, back to your corporate days in energy and insurance and all these different careers that you've had. And I want to talk about that experience. And obviously your health scare was a huge transition and a poignant transition in your career. But think back before that, when you were in that corporate mindset, you talked about, I ticked all the boxes. I went to school, I got the job, I got the house, I got the, income house, I got all these things. What were some transitions that you made earlier in your career that you feel were big transitions for you that impacted your career moving forward?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I remember, when I was in university, I went to university to become a lawyer. And I remember, yeah, I know. Don't worry, it gets better, guys. It gets better. So I was in my first or second year of studying criminology. And I remember the people that I was living with, one of the guys said to me, he said, you really have to be careful before you buckle yourself down into a career that's going to be boring for the rest of your life.
Friends, Julia here. I wanted to take a break in the interview to share about a new resource you're going to want to sign up for. Career management and advancement is often one of the most overlooked areas of our life when it comes to personal growth and investment, even though we spend about a third or more of our day working in said career. Now is the time to start investing in yourself and your career, and the Career Hack Masterclass is the best first step. This 5-part video masterclass with subtitles takes you through some of my process along with some of my best actionable tips to start advancing your career now. Normally, a masterclass like this would be a $200 to $300 investment, but I am giving it away for free because I want to see you start to take control of your career. Head over to controlyourcareernow.com/careerhackmasterclass to sign up and start investing in your career today. For those who do sign up, there is a special offer that you'll want to take advantage of, which is also free. Hint, it might include a session with me. Again, head over to controlyourcareernow.com/careerhackmasterclass to sign up today. I'll leave the link in the show notes and blog post for this episode. Now let's get back to the interview.
And I will never forget that because I had never thought about that. For me, law was what they did on TV, which was a lot of talking, a lot of great arguments, a lot of flashy, amazing things happening. I was like, that is going to be law. And when I realized I wasn't in law school, but I took a lot of law classes. And I had professors that were lawyers, and I looked at it and I said, I do not want that to be my life. I do not want to be all this reading. That's not actually what I want to do. So that was a really big aha moment for me. And so you're going to laugh at this. Then I was like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into accounting and finance. So
logical transition.
When you were like, I don't want a boring career, like I'll go to accounting. Okay. So clearly I still had some learning to do, but what I really thought at that point was I realized that I was really interested in business. And truthfully, when I applied for university, it was either criminology or business. I did apply for those two, but law was calling me more. Turns out that wasn't for me. So I went back to business. And what I figured was I wanted to start my own business at some point, or help others with their business. But I knew accounting and finance were pretty specialized, and that you don't have a business if you don't understand money. So I wanted to get the double major in that. And then what I tried to do is get well-rounded in the other things. So management, marketing, global or international business. What I did is I was the president of our business club. I started a leadership conference. I managed volunteers, which if you want to learn about management, try managing people who you don't pay and you don't control. It's a great way to learn about management. Yes. Marketing, I learned about marketing events, marketing programs, try doing that with a bunch of broke students, convincing them to pay to come to anything. Really good experience. And then for international business, I went on a field school to China twice to learn about how you would do business in other countries. So I was very much about getting things well-rounded. Then I graduated, I fell in love, and I moved to a small northern community. And I realized, okay, I'm not going to start a business here. What am I going to do? And I realized that didn't want to do accounting and finance. No, thank you. So I rebranded myself a bit and had to look at what my volunteer experience was. And what I really had to figure out any kind of experience that could be relevant. And that's when I started in HR. So I started in onboarding and training. In the 8 or 9 months I was in that role, I think we hired there was no team. It was me. I hired over 150 people in that time, trained them, got them in this. We were in the middle of a boom time in this community. And so literally 150 people in 2 small stores. It's a lot of people, a lot of turnover. So I learned a lot there. And then I realized, oh, I like HR. This is kind of cool. So I wanted to work on a team. And that's when I went into the energy industry and started in HR planning and processes, analytics, on relocation, all that kind of stuff. And my career kind of transitioned from there.
Awesome. That's so great. Thank you so much for sharing your thought process and what that looked like during those transitions, because I know one thing, I used to work in higher education. So I worked with recent grads and alumni and all of that. And a lot of times what would happen is they would go to school for one thing, go out and do that thing, and maybe 3 to 5 years come back and go, I hate it. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know what to do. How do I get out? What does that look like? And so, that really perfectly describes your situation in a lot of ways. And one of the things that we used to tell students and alumni all the time is go and volunteer. Go and get experience if you can. Obviously it depends, but that is such a great way for people to gain a different skill set that they know they might need, but they don't have the commitment levels a little bit different in what you need to do. So I really appreciate that that tip there, because I think that is such a great way for people to expand their knowledge and gain new skills. And you don't have to switch your job necessarily right away, especially if you can't do that. And it really helps with that. So thank you so much for sharing that. And your transition from law to business to finance to HR. I can't.
It doesn't even end there. It keeps going. Do you want me to share some more?
Yeah, keep going,
Okay.
especially if it's different.
Oh yeah. So then I'm getting cozy. Then I'm like, okay, now I'm in HR. I'm just gonna, climb that HR ladder. And what's the top? Okay, I'm gonna be a senior vice president of HR because we might as well aim for the top, right? So I worked in HR for a while, and this is where I was getting my chops. I was feeling really good. And then I worked on a project that was relocating a lot of jobs from our town to the big city, which was Calgary. And in that process, my job got moved. And I was working with a mentor at the time, and I said to him, I was like, I don't know what to do. The only other jobs that I can do in HR, there's either recruitment, which I've already done and don't really want to go back into that, or HR advising. And a lot of it was very heavy on the labor relations side, which I just wasn't interested in. I knew what they did because I supported them with the analytics. And I was like, I do not like that, just does not seem fun for me. And I remember my mentor saying, okay, well, like, what are some other jobs you could be interested in? And I remember I looked at him and I said, are you listening? I want to do HR. All the HR jobs have gone. I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. And what he said to me was, okay, Lisa, release the attachment on the topic of work that you're doing and think about the type of work that you want to do. And this is honestly, if you guys could just stop listening after this, I hope you don't, but if you could look instead at the topic or even the field that you're in, and instead think about the type of work you enjoy doing, that changes everything. And what I did, and I often get people to do this too, put a piece of paper next to your desk. And for the next week or two, on one side of the paper, write down all the things that you love doing, the things that you're like, oh my gosh, so much time has gone by. That was so fun. Or, oh, I forgot to eat or pee or sleep or all those things. And write that down. And then all the other things that you keep procrastinating on, because procrastination is information. Don't ignore it. Anything that you procrastinate on, you dread on, you want to gouge your eyeballs with, write that on the other side of the paper. And at the end of the week or two, you're going to have a great indication of what kinds of stuff do you enjoy doing and what do you not enjoy doing. And with that, what I did is I then looked at job descriptions from that lens, which was completely different than saying I only want an HR job. Well, now all of a sudden, I could look at a job in stakeholder relations, and that looked really fascinating, and I was excited about it. There was jobs in supply chain that were very collaborative, and that was exciting for me. There were jobs even in finance that were more kind of shareholder relations that would involve putting together presentations, meeting with shareholders, all that kind of stuff. Super cool, interesting stuff. I'm getting excited right now. I'm like, oh, that would be fun. That's how I felt. And all of a sudden, I had a wide range of job opportunities that were available to me because I expanded it. And even better, they were more interesting than they would have been had I just said, okay, I'll just take any HR job I can get. So from there, I then went into it was learning and development in the safety field. So it meant that I was now training men to work safely on our site. So some days this would be a group of 10 men where I would teach gas detection or respiratory protective equipment, which is like scuba equipment, but without being underwater, like scuba equipment out in the like what firefighters wear, basically. I was teaching people to use that. Confined space entry, permit systems. And then when we had giant turnarounds, which we did every year or so, I'd have rooms of 300 men that were coming in from all across literally the world to come work on this very specific project. And I have 300 men that I'm teaching about how to be safe on our site. And I think I was 24, 25, like 5'0" being like, hello, man, let's talk about how to be safe. So that was my job there. And one of the roles I did, one of the things I took on in that job was I noticed that there was a lot of inefficiencies in the way we were doing our orientations. And so I took on a project with my manager, and we ended up overhauling that. And the result to the business was over $1 million a year in cost savings just by changing the way that we did our orientation. And that got me really interested in, okay, I love project work. I like making things better. I really loved the communication part and the teaching and being in front of people, but I hated teaching the same thing. Like sometimes I would teach respiratory protective equipment 14 times in 10 days, and that was just exhausting and not fun. So that got me thinking about what can I do next? And because this is what I did was a lot of improvement, there's actually a whole department in our company called continuous improvement specialists. And the job description that came up, they wanted someone with 8 years of engineering experience, obviously an engineer, of which I am not. But I just thought, you know what? I bet you I could come in here and with some different experience, I could do a great job. So I applied. got interview and got that job that wanted 8 years of engineering experience, and I had none. So that was the last job I had before my health scare, and so it was quite a big change, but it was really cool. And the amazing thing is that I always just focus on what do I enjoy doing, what's really fun for me, what lights me like, what am I lights me up, what am I really good at, and then kept when I looked at jobs through that lens, it was amazing what was available to me, even as a non-engineer.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. If you've been around the podcast for a while, then you know that what Lisa just talked about, that process of what do you like, what don't you like, that is a cornerstone of what I teach. And I think I have a podcast episode on it somewhere. If I can find that, I'll link it into the blog post for this episode. But that is a huge component of the job search process that people forget. They get stuck in, well, I do this one thing in this one functional area in this one industry, and they can't get out of that thought process. So I so much appreciate you sharing your experience there, because this is seriously, this is one of the things that I talk to clients about all the time. What are your top three? What are your top three skills, qualities, things that just make you absolutely unique? And how can we find work and couple that with some interests also? And how do we find that for you in another place and to open up your mind there? So, one resource I do want to share, and I think this is specific to the US, but it's called onetonline.org. I think it's a .org. I'll link it. I'll link all of this in the blog post under the resources, but that is one website that I recommend to people all the time, because what you can do is you can put in values, you can put in skill sets, you can put in interest areas, and it's going to spit out a ridiculous list of different types of positions that are out there that you can start to read about. And on top of that, it gives you a ton of information in terms of salary. It connects you to job boards and associations for that type of career. So it's a really great place if you want to expand where you're at in your career right now. Definitely hit up that resource as a starting place to do some research. I so appreciate that. And there's so much to unpack in what you said. I just love, oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. I love, and that resource sounds incredible. I often tell people just look at the companies, a couple companies that you're interested in, maybe the ones that you
Mhm.
buy their stuff a lot, and
Yes.
look at some job descriptions in there, and you'll get a sense of, oh, that looks really interesting, or "Ugh, I couldn't even read through the description. That sounds so boring." You'll get a sense of what seems interesting or what seems exciting for you. And that can be helpful too when you're looking even from a long-term perspective of like, where do I want to go? Or what kind of experience would I want to create? Which kind of ties back to what we were talking about before around how can I get that experience, whether it's through volunteering or putting your hand up for a different project or, finding different ways of getting the experience that's going to lead you to where you want to go.
Right. Right. Okay. Now I want to touch on two other things that you talked about. One, being a woman in a male dominated field. Okay. So I know that there are women that are listening to this that are likely in the same position, or there are men who have women working for them, and maybe that's a new thing in their field or in their organization and all of that. What are some tips that you have, maybe for women in that type of situation, or even like men who are managing? Like, what are some tips that you have to help people be successful in that type of environment?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I think it's something a lot of people struggle with. And to be honest, I found it to be it's just humans to humans. And if we can remember that I'm a human and he or she or whoever is a human too, that I felt like took down a lot of the barriers and made things a lot easier. So, what I mean by that is understanding, again, not that this person is this way because they're a man, but this person is this person. And how can I communicate with them? How can I add value to them? How can I show compassion to them? How do I speak to them when something is not okay? And I need them to understand that. So I found that trying to understand each person for who they were was a lot more powerful than trying to think it as like, how do we speak to the men? So that to me was really helpful because the last team I was on, I think it was maybe 60 to 40 men and women. But like even, the men are this makes like even the men are different. Of course they are. Even and all the women are different, right?
Yeah.
And so like for literally with each person on our team, we had a big team, I think of 14 people, and then there were three teams of about that size in our larger team. And each person had a different way that they wanted to be communicated to, a different way that they even saw value in me. And so I think that that's probably the biggest thing that you can do in an industry, whether you're a leader or you're being managed. As I don't know how to, you're let's say individual contributor. You're an individual contributor, or if you are in a female dominated environment or a male dominated environment, it's about people. So understand what makes them tick. What are their goals in their career? Are they in their last 2 years before retirement and they're kind of looking to cruise through, but they can give you a great recommendation and they can mentor you? Awesome. Are they someone who's also trying to prove who they are and to get some great experience? Well, what opportunities can you share with them? Like trying to understand that person, their motivations, how do they communicate? What's their experience? Regardless of gender, I found was one of the best things. And vice versa with myself, I never, or very rarely thought about myself as being a fish out of water. I thought of myself as I'm Lisa. What do I have that's unique that I can bring to the table? What is it that I have that they don't have, that they can't see? How can I be a great contributor on our team? How can I make my boss's goals happen? How can I move whatever team I'm on? How can I make it better? And I think if we focus on like what we can bring to the table and also how can we communicate with people, add value to them and see them just all as people, I think that helps a lot. So that being said, I think it's also, I was a part of and helped create and champion the Women's Diversity Initiative at the company I was working for. So I also recognize that not everybody was necessarily like me. Not everyone like kind of found their groove. It was a little more challenging for people depending on what, and let's be real here. Some people did have really horrible experiences. So I really wanted to help be a part of the change. So we did that. We created a women's diversity initiative and we put on events. This is a kind of volunteer thing I did for the company, but it was a great way to create change because I think in a lot of these industries, change still needs to happen. They're still a little behind where they need to be. And the unfortunate part of that is that they lose great people. They don't necessarily get to access even the people that they do have. They don't get all the creativity and ideas that happen. So I think there's business reasons and just human reasons for us to accelerate that progress. And I think change comes from two places. Change comes from within, when people inside a company create that change and move that change. And change also comes from the outside world, when the outside world saying, okay, well, we don't even apply for jobs at this company anymore because they have a reputation. Or the outside world, like the laws change, policies change, narrative changes, all that stuff, right? So I think change happens from within both of those. And to be honest, when I was there, I was very committed to making a change within the organization. And now that I've left the organization, I'm really committed to creating change outside of the organization. I'm committed to helping women and really anybody who wants to listen to me, but mostly it's just women, helping them become confident, figure out what they want, and leave in job environments that are toxic if they cannot fix it. And I know that that's how change happens too. So I think change happens from within and without. And there's going to be different parts of your life, of your career, your capacity, your mental ability, your experiences that's going to tell you, is this a time where you stand up and you create change inside an organization? Or does you leaving actually create change? And do you do things outside of an organization that also create change within it? So I don't know if
Yes.
that.
No, that's
Those are.
amazing. Yes, yes. One of the themes that I've seen with my guests is this idea of trailblazing. Being a trailblazer in an industry or in an organization, and you just described that perfectly. How can you make waves in an organization or an industry that is still very narrow-minded in certain areas? And, we need people like you in the workforce. And I think that's why I'm so supportive of people being in the 9 to 5, because I think there's still so much change that needs to happen within specific industries, and even industries that seem to on the outside look one way, but then when you get into it, operates very different. So yes, I appreciate you so much and the work that you're doing. And we're going to talk about your coaching and all of that you offer in just a little bit. But I want to dig into something else that you said, which is that you applied for a job where they wanted an engineer with 8 years of experience, and you were pretty much everything they didn't want in the job description, and you applied anyway because you knew that you could provide value. And I want to make sure that the audience, and especially the women out there, are hearing that. And honestly, even the men, because I've had some male clients that this happens to them as well, where you read a job description and you cut yourself out immediately because you only meet, a small percentage of what they're asking for, or there's something in the job description that you're like, I don't have this certification, I don't have this requirement in quotations, and you write yourself off instead of looking at the position and the company as a whole and going, can I add value here? What kind of impact can I make based on the work that I've done in the past? And I think that's amazing. And we talked a little bit before we started the interview about how the part of the reason you're a guest on the podcast right now is because you actually did that with me. I put a call out and I wanted people who were in full-time positions, and you reached out and said, I'm not in a full-time position, but I was, and here's my story. Can we jump on a call? And that was enough for me in how you pitched yourself, which is also important. We can talk about that, but how you pitched yourself and your story and the value that you could add resonated with me. And I knew it would resonate with my audience, which is why I brought you on. So do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So let's also be honest here, Julia. You even said coaches don't apply.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, she wants someone in a full-time job and not coaches, but I'm a coach, not in a full-time job. I think I can do this. And so, and let me also be real. Like, I'm not always as confident. Like, confidence is something, it's a muscle that I'm continuing to build. But what I saw when you posted that was, you shared a little bit about who your audience was and what kinds of things that you thought that they needed to hear, that they could learn. And I thought, you know what, beneath Julia, the podcaster, and beneath Lisa, the coach, is us again as humans. And like, what are you trying to create for your audience? What kind of experience are you trying to give them? What are you trying to teach them? And then can Lisa, the human, can she help create that? And, I honestly, you could have seen that. And some people would have just been like, no, you didn't listen to my instructions, you're gone. And I knew that was a reality, but I thought, you know what? I actually do. If I'm doing it from an ego place of like, I'm going to show her, I'm going to get in there, and then it doesn't work. Same thing with like, I'm going to apply for this engineering job and they're just going to give it to me. Like, that's not how that works. But if I can really think that, do I really believe that I can add value here, whether it's to an engineering job or whether it's to this podcast? If I think I can, and I pitch it and they say, no, that's okay, then we move along. But you'd be surprised how often people are open to different ideas. If you can show that you understand and you're doing it for them and in service of what their goal is and what they're trying to create or accomplish, and not just about your own.
Yes.
So another thing that I think is really important in this is understanding your brand. And I think you probably touch on this with people, but and your brand is not your logo. Your brand is not your colors. Your brand is not your website. Your brand is not even your LinkedIn page or your Instagram. Your brand is how you make people feel and what people say about you when you're not in the room. So that's, I think, a Jeff Bezos quote. I can't take that one. But, for example, and by the way, everybody has a brand. You're listening to this, you're like, I don't have a brand. I'm like, you have a brand. What are people saying in your performance reviews?
Yep.
What are people saying before your performance reviews? What do people say in an interview after you've left the room? What are they saying about you? Even what do your friends say about you? How do they describe you? Are you the really thoughtful, caring friend who always reaches out? Are you the consistent person that they know they can always depend on? Are you the one that's dancing on tables and has the really big hair? I don't know, just an example. Like, who are you, right? So if you can understand that too with your career of what is that common thread of your brand, of how you transform, what you do really well, how you add value to people, then you can apply for a job that maybe doesn't, quote, make sense, or apply for something that you may not have all the experience or all the credentials, but you can figure it out. And I think as long as you understand that for yourself, and then you're confident in that in yourself and you're willing to figure it out, you can.
Yes. Okay. Here's the other thing, Lisa, I have a whole other episode on marketing and your career. So I'm going to link that one in the show notes too. It's I think it's season 4, Be Your Own Board was the overarching theme of that. And one of them was you have to market yourself, and you are a brand, and what does that look like, and everything you just said. So I will link that in the show notes.
Go
Thank
listen to
you.
that episode, guys. Go listen. Yes, because you need to start thinking about this. You do,
Yeah.
because your career is hopefully lifelong and fulfilling, and you've got to understand what it is that makes you unique so that you can use your brand to build the career that you want.
One other thing that I want to touch on that you talked about also is making sure that you can fulfill their need in their position. One of the ways that you can do that is informational interviews and talking with people. And one of the things that I think people get so scared about doing is just reaching out, and again, that's what you did to me. And I was in a position where I was willing to listen. But part of the reason I was willing to listen was your pitch was really solid, and your pitch hit on what I was looking for. And I'm pretty sure based on your pitch, you had done a little bit of research before you pitched me, right? So that's part of, you put it out there, and I could have said no, but you also did the due diligence to make sure that you understood, I think this is what she's looking for, and I can actually add value here. And that is so important from a job searching perspective, from a career perspective, regardless of where you're at. Who are you talking to on a regular basis? Do you have connections at the dream company that you want? Are you connecting with other professionals who are, 5 or 10 years ahead of you in positions that you might see yourself in at some point in the future? And if you don't have that yet, you have to start reaching out and be okay with that rejection that you might get from some professionals, but keep going and keep trying to build that network, because that's going to help you down the road learn, do I want to go into this area? Do I want to go into that? Or should I apply for this? Do you think I'd be a good fit? Here's why I think I would be. And you get to practice that pitch before you go and do it for real. So I so appreciate you sharing that. It's really great.
Yeah, thanks. And you know what? I think that you touched on something else that's really important there too, is to not just do this willy-nilly, to be
Right.
intentional. And that doesn't mean you have to spend hours or everything has to be perfect on all this. I mean, if you're doing a resume, make sure that's pretty perfect.
Yes.
But, for my pitch, I didn't spend 3 weeks researching and pitching, but I
Right.
did. I looked up, what is Julia doing? What's her podcast? What are some of the other kind of guests that she's had? Okay, I think this is, and this, you're like, this is the direction I'm taking my podcast. Okay, so if this is the direction you're going, how do I fit into that? How could I fit in? And being intentional as opposed to just being, all about me. So if you can make it
Right.
more about other people, that's really powerful. And that's actually one of the things that I do want to make sure that we talk about, which is becoming a person of value. That is something that each one of us can do. And it's really important. And it comes down to just helping other people more often. So if you're thinking, I don't have a network right now, or my network is not very big, that's okay, but it's not okay to stay there. So
Right.
one of the things I did, for example, when I first moved to Vancouver and I didn't really know anybody and was trying to get a job when I first moved here, is I committed to helping at least one person every day. And this is me. I didn't have a job. I didn't really know many people, but I was like, what could I do for people to help? And so sometimes it was little things. It was just, reaching out and saying, oh, I read this podcast or read this or listened to this podcast or read this blog post or saw this article and thought this might be great for you. Or whenever I would meet people, I would actually say, what could I do? What are you looking for? What would be helpful for you right now? And then maybe they were looking for a marketing expert, or maybe they were looking for a different job, or maybe they were looking for somebody in an industry. And I can at least keep that in my mind and keep that as something to come back to. So I think being a person of value, that's how you build your network. And if we're ever allowed to go to networking events in person again, that's the way that I always think about networking events as well, is don't go there to just get a bunch of business cards and then throw them out 6 months later, but go there and think about, who can I help today? Same thing, one person, if I could just help one person and have a real connection with them and follow up with them tomorrow, and you do that, once a month, in 12 months, you're going to have a way more powerful network than you would if you didn't do that. And I'm kind of joking about the in-person thing, but you can do that online too. Somebody reaches
Absolutely.
out to you on LinkedIn and adds you, have a conversation, set up a little coffee chat with them, figure out what they're doing and see if you can help them in some way. If you are doing a virtual event, hop in the chat and see who's there. Where are you guys from? What do y'all, what's everybody working on right now? What's everyone's goal? referrals. Oh, like that's cool. You're applying to this job or you're in this company. Oh, do you know this person? Like just try and make connections and help people out as well. Mentor, volunteer, like become a person who helps others. That's how people want to help you too.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. Okay. In the vein of continuing to resource people and making sure that they have all the information that they need after this episode, tell me about a book that changed your perspective in your career or life.
Oh, good question. So, I would say one that, okay, Lean In. I know, does everybody say that? What I
No.
really no, okay. So, and I realize there's some flaws behind it, and definitely as a woman with a young child, like I understand that it's hard sometimes. Let's be real here; it's very difficult. But what I loved about her philosophy, Sheryl Sandberg, by the way, COO of Facebook, is the one that wrote the book. Just talked about like the differences between men and women and why we have so few women leaders, and it just reminded me that like even like what I think I mentioned I wanted to start a business, but I kept telling myself I was going to do it when my kids moved out. And I didn't even have kids. And I was already like, oh, they got to move out before I can start a business. But those are the kinds of things that we tell ourselves too. And I think as women, it's
Right.
like, okay, well, I can't do this career because I'm not ready yet, or I can't
Mhm.
put my hand up for that position because I'm not ready yet, or because I have kids, or because I do this thing. And I'm not saying this or advocating for burnout. That's not what I'm saying here. But I think sometimes we pull ourselves out of the race before we've even had the chance to be considered, or we
Yes.
don't even throw our name in the hat. We don't even think it's possible for us or we can do it. And so I think sometimes kind of like the how is it possible is a better way to look at it. And I think Sheryl Sandberg's story, the book, it was really transformative for me in the early days of my career, reading it and being like, yeah,
Mhm.
I can do this. I got this. And also she, recognizing that your career is a long thing. It's not a quick one great resume, one great interview, one perfect job. It's
Right.
evolving. So I thought that was a really great book. One other one I want to share too, which ties to kind of some of my personal philosophies and some of the things that I really believe in. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I don't know if
Yes.
yeah. So not a book about careers, but a book about finance and money.
Yes.
And one of the things I think that we forget sometimes in the corporate world, when like someone just pays you every month or twice a month or however often, if you're lucky, maybe more, so we forget that we're actually still even our own businesses ourselves. Like you still
Mhm.
have to manage your time in your life 168 hours. You still have to manage your finances. And I believe that it's so awesome if you can make your money work for you. And that's what Rich Dad Poor Dad talks about. So I see so many people that just assume that the job will be there forever. And I'm speaking this from being in a place where there's been lots of booms and busts. So I've
Right.
gotten the quote blessing, I guess, of seeing that, but not everybody gets to see that. So if you're listening to this, you're like, that won't happen here. It can happen anywhere. um, and it's just about like being proactive about your money, looking at it from the perspective of like not always just trading time for money, which I
Mhm.
think is also a great perspective, not only for like how you invest your money outside of work, but also even just thinking about what you do as value, and that makes you feel more confident when you're asking for a raise or when
Mhm.
you're setting the bar for even your salary expectations. If you think about the value that you provide versus just like the time dollar trade, I think that's so great. So that book really changed my mindset around just how I approach my life, my finances, even like then the value that I bring to, whether it's to a corporate job or to my own job or even to my family.
Yeah. I remember one time I had a manager tell me there are certain people in an organization who get paid for their butt in the seat, so to speak. And there are other people in the organization that get paid for their brain. And she said to me, you're being paid for your brain. So your butt does not have to be in the seat from 8 to 5 if it doesn't need to be. Like
Mm.
you're being paid for how your brain works and thinks and the value that you bring to this team. And that statement completely changed how I viewed myself, but then also how I viewed other people in the organization. And I would try to figure out, of the people that I was in community with in the organization, who was paid for their brain and who was paid to have their butt in the seat, because their view of themselves and their job was completely different. So I really
Mm.
appreciate you talking about that, because yes, and Rich Dad Poor Dad, financial management, that is one thing I am so passionate about. And we could do a whole other chat and podcast episode.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Around financial management, because it is so important. And from that career perspective, when you have a really good handle on what your finances are, what your financial goals are, what you want to do, then your ability to go, okay, I'm here and then I need to be here, you can ask for that so much more confidently, because it's tied to your personal values, your mission of what you want your life to be. And once you understand that, your view of money looks so different in every aspect, because you understand what you're working for. I also want to touch on with the fact that nobody's secure at this point. And I think COVID has really brought to light some of that. And I think about our friends who work for the Walt Disney Corporation, who work for Disneyland and for the parks. You know, they've been getting laid off in droves. People who have worked in the parks for 20, 30 years in insanely specific positions that they can only do. And they're being laid off because of this pandemic. And I'm a big Disney person, so I stay on top of that news. But it's been breaking my heart, because these are people where this has been truly their life's work. And never did we think Disneyland or Walt Disney World was going to, well, Disneyland specifically, was going to be out of commission for almost a year. Nobody saw that coming. And so the second that you start to get complacent in your career is the second that you have to take a step back and go, oh, what's going on there? Am I bored? Is something going on with the industry? I need to make sure that I'm staying current and on top of my skill set and what's going on, so that if something like this happens again, or it's still currently happening, I'm prepared if something happens. And I think finances is a great way to be prepared. If you have your emergency fund, if you have all these things in place, if something does happen, it's not going to freak you out the same way that it would somebody who doesn't have those things in place.
Totally. Finances equals freedom. It means you don't
Absolutely.
have to stay in a job that you hate. It means you have the option to move, to try new things, to try something and like, I don't like it. That's fine. I'll give it a go and I can move. But finances, I think I love how you just tie that back to career, because I think you're absolutely right. It does give you freedom. One last book I want to share that was really transformational in my career was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yes.
Super classic. I mean, you'll see a lot of other self-help, productivity, all that a lot of it comes from Stephen Covey's book. And so if you have never read it, or if you haven't read it in a couple of years, go back to it, because it's just a good one. It's just a classic that really helped me out with my career as well.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing. Lisa, this has been such a great conversation. Oh my goodness. I feel like I'm going to have you back on. We're going to have to talk about more things.
I would love that.
What I would love for you to do is take a couple minutes and talk about the work that you're doing now. You are a coach, you have your own podcast. Go ahead and tell the audience all the things that you're doing right now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I am a speaker, a coach, and the host of a podcast called Golden Girls, GOAL as in goals. And if you can't guess it from that title, my jam is all about goals. So I love to help women, first of all, figure out what it is that they truly want. Like, what's that childhood dream that you keep telling yourself you can't do? Second, have the courage to actually go for it, and then make a plan to get there. Not a SMART goal. I hate SMART goals. There's a whole podcast on that. But making some sort of a plan to get there, and then getting out of your own way to make it happen. So making sure you've got the right mindset, the habits to make it happen. So I work with a big variety of women. I have a year-round community called Golden Girls Community. I run a mastermind called Golden Girls Mastermind. And the women are really diverse. Some of them are corporate, some of them are entrepreneurs, some of them are stay-at-home moms, but they all have this realization that they know that there's something out there for them, something else they want to create in their lives, and they want some tools and support to get there. So that's a big part of what I do. I just released a 100-day goal planner. That's the method that I teach in my programs. Yeah. So, I teach people to set goals in 100-day chunks. That way they're not so overwhelming, that you can make progress on something that's meaningful, get results, that inspires you to do more and chunk it down one goal at a time. So I just released the planner a couple weeks ago, and it's really cool to see people starting to use it. And I use it every day now too, which is really cool because it's something I've been kind of doing on my own. And it's really fun to have it in a book and have it available.
That's
So that's what I do.
Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing. Okay, I talk about SMART goals.
Oh, we're going to talk.
But I know there's a lot of controversy around SMART goals. So what I love about this is there are a ton of different ways that you can approach goal setting. So if SMART goals is not your jam, then check out what Lisa has to offer, and that that process might work for you as well. So this is what I love about bringing other people on. There are so many different perspectives and ways to get to the same ending. And my thing, and the one thing that I want the audience to hear is, just because I say something, just because Lisa says something, just because some big name person says something and says you should do it, does not mean that that is the process that's going to work for you. You have to know yourself. You have to figure out what is going to work for you, the style that's going to work for you. And it might be piecemealing it together from a lot of different people to figure out, this is what I need in my life, or this is what this is going to look like. So
yes. And you know what? If SMART goals are working for you, keep doing it. Keep working for you. I speak to the people who SMART goals doesn't work for them.
yeah, no,
We've created a different
it.
process for them. And I even say, my process, it's the one that works really well for me and works really well for my clients. But if it doesn't, like, whatever, just find something that works for you. I love that.
Absolutely.
Like, you're your own best expert. Go with that always.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And how can people connect with you? What is the best way if they want to talk to you or get connected with you for coaching or anything else like that?
Yeah. So my website is www.lisamichaud.com. And can you?
I'll link it.
You'll link it. Okay,
yeah,
great.
All the links.
All the links. All right. Okay. And then I'm the Lisa Me Show on all social platforms. So Pinterest, Instagram. Instagram is kind of the one I'm there the most. Facebook, LinkedIn, and Clubhouse, TikTok, wherever you want to find me.
Yeah.
But Instagram is definitely one of the best places too. And then my podcast is Golden Girls Podcast, and you can find it on all the podcast platforms.
Awesome. Awesome. Again, thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for trusting me. I really appreciate you just being open to something different. And, I hope that your listeners enjoyed this, and you truly have their best interest at heart. Every conversation I've had with you, this is my second now. You just really, I can tell how much you care about every single one of your listeners, and they're really lucky to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't tell her to say that, but
you can pay me later. It's okay.
Thank you.